Oh yes, that looks good. It looks good.
Nah, that's not the one. So for this Eyestalk, I want to try casting the eyeball and pivot in aluminium. As I'm building a late 60s style Dalek, I'm using the Project Dalek Mark III plans for the Eyestalk dimensions. The Eyestalk comprises of an eyeball, a pivot, a 25mm aluminium tube, a 32mm aluminium tube, a 32mm acrylic tube, and 5 Perspex eye discs. First job was to model and 3D print the eyeball pattern so I could sandcast it. The outer dimensions are based on the Mark III plans. The inside was hollowed out with a draft on the side so it would release from the sand, and it was made in 2 parts to aid with the casting process. The parts were printed on my 3D printer, which also happens to be about the cheapest 3D printer going, but it does the job for simple patterns like this. As you can probably tell, I need to rebuild my furnace. I just can't access my roll of care wool in storage due to the current lockdown, so it'll have to do as it is for now. Here I'm ramming up the first half of the pattern in my flask using Man's Bond oil sand. I'm roughing up the surface so the inside parts of the pattern stick together. Now I'm pre-filling the top half of the pattern with sand before it's rammed up. This is so the inside shape of the pattern becomes stuck to the bottom of the flask when it is separated. The pattern I printed had a bit of a mistake. There was no draft on the hole at the top. Because of this, the sand became jammed in there and had to be cut out. The end result is that I had more metal to remove during cleanup. Here I'm making a small pouring basin so the metal is poured straight from the crucible down into the flask. This reduces turbulence and allows some of the trapped bubbles to escape.
Oh, that's good. Ooh, that's warm. Oh yes, that looks good. It looks good. Yes. Alright, there's a lot of shit to dig out. I could do that in a minute. Yeah, that was definitely the best thing I've ever done. Yeah, that's come out really well. I think there's a tiny little bit where this edge has been lost, but I'll survive. Yeah, that's the only defect I can see.
Ugh, this is why I'm building a workshop and a proper workbench in the next couple of months. I need a bloody vice. Now if I hadn't screwed up the pattern and broken off some of the sand, I wouldn't have to be drilling and filing this extra metal out. And if I could get some of my tools out of storage, I could be using a proper chisel and not a bloody screwdriver. Here you can see a fair few surface imperfections from the casting, including a bit of shrinkage around the in-gate and vents. planned to try anodising this part originally, but due to lockdown could not get hold of the kit, so I decided to patch it up with car body filler and paint the eyeball instead. I eventually sanded the eyeball down to 800 grit ready for painting. The pivot was made in much the same way as the eyeball, although I modelled it with two flat surfaces so the best side could be picked after casting. This part needs a tube through it, so here I am preparing a mould for a sand core made from some 32mm acrylic tube cut in two halves. For this part I'm making the core from reinforced oil sand rather than sodium silicate sand, although I do have some. I tried it without the tube in the middle and the core didn't hold its shape. Again, I made the mistake of not having enough draft on this pattern. This time I didn't entirely sand the sides of the pattern smooth, and the sand keyed itself into the ridges left from the 3D printing process. Here you can see where some of the sand has broken off around the outside of the pattern.
Needs a bit of filing out.
There's a fair bit of shrinkage on this part, mostly around the core. If I do this again, I think it will need a couple of risers. These indentations will need to be filled in somehow.
Tiny little bit there. Otherwise, it's a really good. Oh, it's a little thing there. Not bad though, I'm pretty happy with that. Pretty happy with that.
I almost immediately made my first cock up. When trying to file the core hole out, I managed to completely wedge the tube inside the hole and couldn't get it back out. So I decided if it wouldn't come out intentionally, I had to be sure it wouldn't pop out by itself later. I decided to try and fill the shrinkage using some Durafix brazing rods I had left over from making the gun. This is a massive heatsink, so it took a long time to get to temperature. Shot it up the tube and up my arm. Getting a belt sander, I don't think I can do anything about that. I'm just going to leave it for the moment. A couple of little pinholes there, but that should be covered up, so I need to file all that back. I decided I wasn't happy with the void left in the Durafix. I thought I would try an experiment to see if I could preheat the pivot in the oven and then use some lead-free solder to fill the gaps. The hope was that the solder would stick to the pivot before the Durafix melted. Unfortunately, this didn't work and I let the pivot get too hot. The Durafix started to melt and mix with the solder. According to my chemistry GCSE, the resultant alloy is cesium frankylithic nixyaluminium rixidixidroxidexidroxide. I did manage to smooth it out enough to start sanding, thankfully. The surface isn't perfect and I didn't want to make it worse. It is what it is, and I'll just have to make sure that part of the pivot is hidden when fitted in the dome.
Completely screwed up there. When you look at it side on, you can see that.
Like the eyeball, the pivot was sanded down to 800 grit, which gave a shiny but brushed style finish like I wanted. Before I assemble the Eyestalk, I should mention that I ordered some of the original blue perspex from Project Dalek's website, and you can get it laser cut to your required dimensions.
So at the moment that's just kind of hanging around. So all we need to do now is mark out the positions of the eye discs. So this is measuring about 152. We need to mark the halfway point. So 76, 76, 96, 116, 56 and 36. So let's check if it actually fit on. I might need some fettling. Ooh. Oh, that's a pretty tight fit actually. Yeah, these are so tight I might not even need to glue them on. There we go. I think these are slightly too far apart. You know, that whole section there should be 3 inches and it's too wide. I think they need to be closer together. Marginally. I'll tell you what, actually, let's have that. I don't know. It's pretty good, isn't it? Could be pretty happy with that. Yes, that's not looking too bad. I just 3D printed a temporary front for the eye, just to make it look kind of like the real deal. But we're going to do something a bit more complicated in the next video. Actually, when this is in use, this will be the other way up. That'll be at the bottom. So that'll be inside the eye. Inside this skirt, that'll be inside the dome section. Still a few things to do on it, but at the very least, it's starting to look the part. Oh well, stay tuned for more updates. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.